Hey y'all, my name is Meg. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you'd rather just watch the speed paint version, I will put a link in the description and an eye in the sky right now. So this week I considered giving a little bit of a tutorial, but realized that I wanted to make this video before ever giving one of those, because in this video I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't just follow art tutorials. So, look forward to ignoring any tutorial that I make in the future. And before I really get into it, I just wanted to clarify what I mean by art advice or art tutorials. In this video, I don't mean like when you Google how to draw a sheep and you get something that's like, just draw a cloud with legs and a face. Things that show you how to draw one specific thing from one specific angle, you know? Those pose their own set of problems, but that's not what I'm talking about today. When I'm talking about art advice in this video, I'm talking about things that say, hey, here's how you draw hair in any scenario, or here's how you do lighting and shading for any piece that you do. Those really general tips that are meant to be used in every single piece that you make, not just one drawing where you draw one specific thing. Now, my biggest problems with tutorials are the ones that don't tell you why you're doing something. Actually, scratch that. My biggest problem is with tutorials that tell you not to do something without telling you why. Because it's always framed as if it were a sin, like, don't shade with black or you're the devil and your art is terrible. I have seen like 3 people out of the hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have given that exact advice say what the problem is with shading with black. And by framing it as if it were the worst thing that you could possibly do when shading a piece, they're neglecting to inform you of situations in which shading with black is good. So that's one reason to not listen to tutorials. They aren't always showing you the whole picture or explaining why you should or shouldn't do something. A good tutorial will, but not all tutorials are good. But that doesn't mean ignore all tutorials, because even tutorials that don't go into why you should or shouldn't do something still have something to offer, but that something is not the entire tutorial, if that makes sense. Even tutorials that are good and explain the reasoning shouldn't be followed completely, because not every piece is the same. Someone could make a really good tutorial about what's wrong with making an image that's centrally composed and why you should use the rule of thirds or the golden spiral or something. And that tutorial can explain really well how to compose a piece using one of those methods, but that doesn't change the fact that you can make a beautiful composition that's centrally aligned. Honestly, some of my favorite examples of photography ever are central compositions. But pretty much every single composition tutorial you see rightly points out how boring central compositions typically are. And it's much easier to make stunning compositions using the golden spiral. But if you make every single piece using the golden spiral, your work gets repetitive, boring, and monotonous. Because you need that variety that you just can't get from following one tutorial. That's why I personally believe that you shouldn't be drawing your wealth of knowledge entirely from one source, because no one person knows everything there is to know about anything. So if you just learn from one person's advice, you're already pulling from an incomplete set of knowledge, made worse by the fact that they can't tell you everything you know in the tutorial, so even less knowledge is getting passed on to you. However, if you look at multiple tutorials on the same subject, you will learn more. For this though, I actually think that the internet makes this harder, not because there's a lack of tutorials, but because there are too many, and they're all basically the same. Because anyone can give advice and anyone can make a tutorial. And so many people do what I do and make something weekly. Like, I'm giving advice here. I give advice in like every video. But I make sure to only talk about things that I think I'm qualified to talk about. But if you make weekly videos for long enough, eventually you run out of things that you're qualified to talk about. And then what happens is they talk about things that they aren't as knowledgeable in. Maybe they watch one video on the subject and then they make their own, and then someone watches their video and makes their own video on the subject, and then someone watches their video, and so on and so on. And with each subsequent video on the subject, less and less information is being distilled. So even if you watch a bunch of videos on the subject, if none of them know what they're talking about, then you can't learn anything. There are other resources. In all honesty, what I do most of the time is look at who's making the tutorial to see if they're actually a qualified source. But what I do sometimes is I will go to my local library and check out a book on whatever topic I'm interested in. Like, say I wanted to learn about composition. Well, a quick search on YouTube for composition art yields 2 million results. Those are not 2 million good tutorials. But hey, looking at this first page, I see a couple names that I recognize that I think know their stuff when it comes to composition. So maybe I spend half an hour to an hour watching one or two of these tutorials for what I'm interested in. But what I'm way more likely to do when it comes to a topic that's as complex and vast as composition is go get a book from a library. Searching my library's database leads me to a much more manageable list of books. I could individually search up each book and each author online to know if they're giving me good information, and if I were physically at the library, I could actually flip through each book to see which one I wanted to pick out. But since I'm not there, I would say that I'd probably end up checking out two books because you should be drawing from multiple sources. One called Composition and one about photography, which I can tell from the excerpt available online is mostly about the composition of photographs. And I don't do photography, but there's a good reason to pick up a book about photography anyway, which I'll get into later. But checking a book out of the library means that there's more information because people making YouTube videos are still trying to condense large amounts of information into videos that are way shorter than they need to be because people tend to click off of videos that are super long. And it's more likely that these books were written by qualified people. I know that realistically anyone can write a book in 2018, but it's a lot more effort than making a video is, so the person who wrote it probably at least had some intermediate knowledge, which I don't think is a guarantee online. I wouldn't go to the library if I just wanted some quick tips on something specific, like painting water, but I do it for large topics that are really integral to every piece and important to understand, like composition and color theory. Now, to backtrack a little bit, I wanted to go back to drawing from multiple sources. I think that one thing that a lot of people do is they find one artist that they're really inspired by and follow any tutorials that they make and no other tutorials. And this is bad for the reasons that I pointed out earlier, but it's also bad because your art is going to end up looking exactly like that artist's work. And let me clarify that art style theft is not a thing, and that's not what I'm trying to talk about, but I do think that mimicking just one person's art style is detrimental to your own art development, because yeah, you're picking up all of the things you like about someone's art style, but you're also picking up everything that they're doing wrong. And it's difficult to improve on an art style if you have no other inspiration. What you should do, in my opinion, is look at a lot of different styles and analyze what each style does well and what it doesn't and why certain things don't work and develop your art style based on that. But that's just me. And that involves analyzing a lot of art styles and a lot of advice and tutorials. I also think that you shouldn't follow advice exactly. That's why I think it's good when art tutorials say why they recommend doing something, because then you can apply that knowledge to any piece. If a tutorial says, always shade purple with blue and highlight it with pink, without explaining why that is, all you know is how to shade purple. But if a tutorial says that and follows it up with, because it looks closer to something you would see in real life than white and black, we often see things lit in warm lighting which would cast a cool shadow. Then you know how to shade any color because you can apply that logic anywhere. That wasn't a good explanation, but this isn't a video on lighting and shading, so I'm not going to put a lot of effort into explaining it. But something like that would mean that you don't have to look up a tutorial for every single thing that you make. But if you follow an art tutorial exactly, then you aren't learning as fast as you should. By already starting out with experimenting and breaking apart from the tutorial, you're already learning and improving. And you learn a bit by following tutorials, but you learn way more by experimenting on your own. And that's why I think it's a good idea to get a book on photography, even though I do drawing and painting, because there's really no way for me to exactly follow a photography tutorial, so I'm forced to experiment. And that's what you should do. That's how you learn. Taking inspiration from multiple sources and experimenting with that information so you can work out what works and what doesn't for yourself. It's good. It's great. So yeah, that's why I think you shouldn't blindly follow art advice. Some advice is just bad. Sorry. But we live in the internet age. Anyone can make a YouTube video, anyone can make a blog post, anyone can write a book. Not everyone is qualified to give advice. And even people who are qualified tend to overgeneralize and not explain why they recommend doing what they do. Like, don't shade with black is, in general, good advice, but not always applicable and honestly kind of useless if you don't know why you aren't doing it. So, draw from multiple sources because eventually a source will explain their advice, and if you saw something that was bad advice, other sources will contradict that and you'll end up with some good advice in the end. So, hey, now I feel like all my bases are covered to start doing tutorials on this channel. Maybe look out for that soon. Not next week though, I've got a special video. I will talk to y'all then. Hype. Bye.